Welcome to the last CALS Comm Workshop of the 2022 calendar year. Thanks for joining us today. We're excited to have two representatives from the Office of Institutional Equity and Diversity. We have Dr. Stephanie Helms Pickett, and she is currently the Associate Vice Provost for Diversity Engagement, Training and Education. And Dr. Melissa Edwards-Smith is the new Director of Education and Engagement with the Office for Institutional Equity and Diversity. So thank you both so much for joining us today, and the show is yours.
Thanks, Janine. I just got a big promotion in my education there. So yeah, I'm a doctor now. I've been told many times that 2 masters doesn't actually equal a doctorate degree, but I tried to get that real hard. But thank you so much, Janine, for that. I appreciate that. I'll just reintroduce myself, and then Stephanie will give you a chance to as well. So I am Melissa Edwards-Smith. I'm the Director of Education and Campus Engagement for our Inclusive Excellence and Strategic Practice Unit within OIED. And I'm excited to be here with you today. Stephanie?
Good morning, everyone. Stephanie Helms Pickett. I use she, her pronouns, and I serve as the Associate Vice Provost in the unit and get to make good trouble with Melissa. And we are excited to share space with you all today. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, and thanks, Stephanie, for reminding me. I also use she, her pronouns too as well. So we will get started with our utility of inclusive language. I will admit that this is kind of a hybrid thing. This is kind of a new session that we're going into today. So we're going to be condensing down what usually would be presented in our unconscious bias workshop to give really a preface for getting to that inclusive language and how do some of those missteps occur. So I'm going to take the first part, and then I'm going to hand it over to Stephanie for the second part. So we're going to get started. I do want to let you know, since I've just told you about our unconscious bias workshop, that if you are interested, if this really sparks an interest in you to continue your learning, we do have the Inclusive Excellence Certificate Program. There's still space available for this academic year if you want to go ahead and sign up. That is a 4-part certificate program. Again, unconscious bias, the macro of microaggressions, fundamentals of equal opportunity, and applied cultural identity. So each of those courses is approximately 2 hours long. You can take them in person or in a virtual format, or you can do those in an asynchronous format in an online module that's super dynamic. And we're really pleased to be able to present that so that folks can take that on their own time whenever they can. So if you have any questions about that later, you can go to our website and get more information, or feel free to reach out to either Stephanie or I after this presentation today. So our learning outcomes for today are brief, but very important to explore how biases impact our practice, explore the return on investment of inclusive behaviors, and then identify strategies to enhance inclusion in the workplace. So that's what we've been charged to do, and we're going to go ahead and get started with our ground rules. I know as folks are joining in, they might miss these ground rules, but we'll kind of keep everybody in check. We do want to make sure we're actively listening. We have a short amount of time with you all today. This might not be the first time you've thought about some of these things, but wherever you are on your learning journey with this topic, want to make sure that we're always testing our assumptions and challenging our thinking and finding new ways to apply it to our professional and our personal lives as well. We, of course, want to be respectful, listening to others and taking in that information. If you hear things that really resonate with you, but you're not sure why, maybe take a note of that and come back to it later. If you're feeling really affirmed and someone's making a great point, we can take a note of that and come back to that later. Sometimes we need to think and process a little bit as we go along. We do want to take risks. Don't be shy, ask questions. It makes it fun for us. We'll be checking the chat box, and Janine's going to help us out with that as well. So if things come up for you, or we're going a little too fast on some things, please let us know. We want to be responsive to your ideas and your comments all along the way. And just remember, if you feel like it's a dumb question, please don't. Even making mistakes is an opportunity for us to all learn together. We do want to maintain confidentiality. We want to take all the lessons that we learned here and spread those out to our colleagues and to others across campus. But we want to keep any private information, anything that's shared that might be confidential. We want to keep that in this space. So take the lessons, but leave the private information. And we're going to keep our discussion focused. I know we've got a million things going on. We could be talking about the exciting turkey pardon that's going on as well. But we're going to stay focused on what our task at hand. Okay. And if you can agree to those ground rules, even if you don't have your camera on, if you can give me a thumbs up or a reaction. Thank you. Others, thank you. Annette, Bethany, great. And feel free to turn your, thank you, Megan, and Kishan. If you want to turn your camera on, it actually makes it really fantastic for us as well. Thank you. So we're not kind of talking into a black hole. If you're not in a space where that works, that's okay too. We understand sometimes it's better to keep that camera off. All right. Thanks, Bethany, for that. We're going to go ahead and get started and thinking about how biases impact our practice. So nobody wants to feel like we have biases. I know it's so uncomfortable when I have these conversations with folks. It's like, but I don't feel that way. I really don't have these biases. It's not coming into my work environment. But we're here to say, it's okay. Let's get through this. Let's think about it deeply together. And let's start with, well, what exactly is unconscious bias? What, in your own words, if you can put into the chat, how would you describe unconscious bias? Or you can come off mute. Feel free to do that as well. Assumptions you make automatically. Thank you. Janine says ways that you think about people or situations that you don't even realize. Having preconceived notions about a person, place, thing, or event. These are great answers. Anyone else? Bias that is sort of ingrained into us by the society around us. Oh, excellent, Bethany. Very good. Yeah, I love that. We're going to be touching on some of that. Anyone else want to chime in? Okay, so great responses. We use this definition that biases are attitudes that affect our understanding, our actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. While the term bias is often seen as a negative, your biases can be favorable or unfavorable. You can have a bias towards something or against in that negative way. So we grabbed that from the Kirwan Institute. They've got some great modules on there if you want to go to their website. So building on understanding bias, we have to understand it's impossible for us to not have biases, whether they are favorable or unfavorable. So everyone has biases. It's just not possible to get to this point in our life without having them. Not every bias is negative or hurtful. That may be a surprise, but it's not recognizing biases that can lead to bad decisions at work, in life, and relationships. So if we all have those biases, now we need to take that unconscious and make it conscious so that we are aware of them and we can not be acting on those unconscious biases. So how did we get to this point? If we all have biases, we might want to say, well, I'm uncomfortable with this, but I want to understand more. So there's really some scientific reasoning around how we got these biases ingrained in us. The first reason is really, again, that scientific reasoning. So reason number one, it's the way our brains process information. So we have two different types of processing, and one is fast thinking, which can be described as cognitive autopilot, that allows you to respond with little or no unconscious thought. Slow thinking, on the other hand, is the process in which decisions are made that require concentrated attention and deliberation. So we have these shortcuts. The fast thinking is really a shortcut to making decisions. And we may think about that, for example, when you're driving, maybe you end up in your driveway and you're like, oh, I don't remember like going through those red lights. I hope, I hope I didn't just drive right through a stoplight, because you've done that drive so many times, you're able to, be on autopilot unless something crazy happens, right? You're just going to end up where you're going. So that's one example of that fast thinking. Another example of fast thinking, and this, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but maybe somebody plays a trick on you and they put like a plastic spider in your lunchbox, or, something jumps out at you, and you think it might be something else, right? So something scary. This happens to me when I'm running on the greenway in the springtime and the snaky snakes are coming out, and I'll be running along and I think I see a snake coming on the path to get me, and I jump like 10 feet in the air, only to realize before my feet touch the ground that it's actually a stick. So I'm like so embarrassed that, I respond before I can actually process, well, that's not really a snake, that's a stick, right? So maybe this has happened to you. If somebody plays a trick on you, you scream and then you go, that's so dumb. It's obviously plastic, right? So maybe that's happened to you before. If it has, or if it hasn't, well, that's pretty awesome. Another example of this fast processing is, and this is where a lot of the science and data came from initially, are these kind of optical illusions. So your brain thinks it's seeing something that it's really not. And that is in the case of these kind of, which stick is longer, which line is longer. And your brain kind of has this gut reaction. Well, it has to be the one on the left with the arrows pointing out and not the ones pointing in, when they're actually the same size. And every time they do that, I think, I still don't know if that's right. I still want to say that one on the left is actually longer. So these are some examples of that fast thinking that you may be really familiar with. In addition, I'm not sure if this has ever happened to you. Have you ever mistaken? I've waved at somebody on campus. I thought I knew exactly who it was, and I gave them a big old wave, and actually they waved back, but they were waving to somebody behind me. And I was like, I thought that was you. And then they were like, who are you? I have no idea. I was so embarrassed. Has anybody else had mistaken identity? Janine says yes. Bethany says yes. Thankfully, thank you, Annette. You're not going to faux show. Okay, I love it. I do that all the time. Okay, great. Thank you. Now I'm not as embarrassed that I'm not the only one that has happened to. How did you feel when you mistook someone for someone else? That's, I just shared. I'm very embarrassed about that. How'd that make you feel?
Embarrassed.
Yeah.
Or like, wondering why I thought that was the same person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like what made me think that was them? They don't even live in this town or something like that, right? You never know. It's kind of embarrassing to catch yourself making those, but that's part of that fast thinking process, is to kind of place people in certain areas. All of these kind of instinctual things have helped us with survival, again, jumping out of the way of something that's dangerous, categorizing people, recognizing people. It's that fast part of the brain that has led to, where we are today as humans. What about, so yes, so again, sometimes our eyes see what we want to see, but what about if you have made an assumption about someone was wrong based on kind of a fast judgment? Have you ever done that before? Think about that for a minute. I know when I go to Target, if I see somebody with a red shirt on and I can't find the toilet paper, I'm like, hey, do you work here? Or I just ask that person. For some reason, every time we go to the hardware store, people ask my husband where to find things. I don't know what it is about him. He looks like he works there. But has anybody ever made an assumption about someone in a similar situation like that? Okay, absolutely, definitely. And you probably feel the same way as when you have like that mistaken identity. Is like, why did I think that that person was someone else, right? So maybe based on their characteristics or just the situation, those snap judgments can lead you to make assumptions that are incorrect as well. So here are some of those mistaken identities and unfair assumptions that come up very frequently. And this is just a few of those. So for example, female pilots being mistaken for flight attendants, male nurses being mistaken as doctors, and vice versa, female doctors being mistaken as the nurses, young executives mistaken for interns. I feel like I've seen all of these on sitcoms, you know, growing up. There's always some mistaken identity, and then the reveal is actually that's not the intern, he's your new boss, right? There's a show about that, Hidden Boss or something like that. I can't remember. But yeah, so you know, the new person's actually your boss, right? Undercover boss, thank you. So, you know, but can you imagine if this was your daily experience, right? If you were that female pilot who's always being asked, you know, can you hang my jacket up in the, you know, the front area behind the cockpit, or, you know, having that female doctor who's having to say, you know, I'm sorry, I'm not the nurse, but I'll get one for you, right? So that kind of daily experience can really take a toll on someone who's constantly having those kind of unfair assumptions being placed on them. So what are the impacts of unfair assumptions of others in the workplace? What can you think of?
It hurts with promotion or yeah.
Yeah, so might be passed over for opportunities because you don't kind of fit that mold, or people just don't think of you in that way, right? Or think of that person in that way. So that can be really harmful. So discounting their knowledge, their wisdom, exactly. Thank you for sharing that. So, you know, maybe you're not, I'm going to put air quotes, you know, you're not old enough to have that wisdom yet, right? Or you don't have that experience enough to make those kinds of contributions. So those can be very limiting when we you know, arrive to those unfair assumptions about others in the workplace. And there's many, many more that we're. Go ahead, Carrie. Yeah.
Yeah. I've worked in positions mostly that were held by a lot younger people, and I look very young for my age. And I've worked with parents, and so they always assumed that I was much younger than them, even though a lot of times I was older than them, and so they would treat me more like a child in a lot of those situations.
Yeah,
So.
I'm sorry that that has happened to you, but I do appreciate your sharing that experience, that kind of ageism, you know, whether it's adultism or ageism, you know, can be very harmful for folks who either appear older or appear younger, and not giving them the credit that they deserve in those situations. So thank you, Carrie.
Yeah, my last position, I was running this one lesson program, and some of the parents really didn't think that I was experienced enough or old enough to be holding that position, even though I'm in my 40s.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
it's kind of funny when they think that you're a teenager and you have teenage children yourself.
Right, right. Gosh, I can imagine, that's harmful to feel so discounted in that way. And I also can relate to that when I was actually younger, but had kind of an important position working with a lot of government officials. They would really tut some of my experience and discount, that I was actually in charge of the program that they were going through. And, it made me work twice as hard, honestly, to overcome some of those unfair assumptions that they were placing on me as well. So I totally get that. So, this is really common. This from the New York Times, I found this article really interesting, where people revealed and they were surprised by the unconscious biases that they had, even though they didn't think that they had unconscious bias in this way. And I wanted to share this one as an example as well. And this woman, Sandra, is writing in, she's 70 years old, and she wrote, she was attending a Montessori conference in Kansas City with teachers from her son's school. So this probably happened decades earlier, and she still remembers this so vividly, that she kept noticing a small Filipino woman carrying a baby changing tote around and wondered if she was part of the hotel cleaning staff. What a surprise to learn she was the main speaker for the conference, a world expert in Montessori and public schools. And she concludes, how we lose out from experiencing the full blessings of life when we succumb to racial stereotyping. And that's really what we want to, be combating all the time, is these stereotyping that we have. It's inside of us, and we need to, again, make that more conscious. But if you want to read more of those, that is, I found those to be really, really interesting and powerful to read those comments that folks included in that. Okay, so that's the part of the first process that we talked about, is why we have these unconscious biases, and that is part of that fast thinking, not slowing down, reacting to visual cues that we have, and that is just part of our brain's process. But how do those reactions get planted in there? We're going to talk about the second reason why we have unconscious bias, and this is really due to the cycle of socialization. So this model was created by Bobby Harrow, a psychologist, and looking at kind of that process of internalizing the norms and ideologies of society that we have learned through every institution that we interact with: education, church, peers, family, law, media, all of those things that we have interacted with throughout our lives create this kind of internalized view of what it means to be us and what it means to be not us, for others. And so these, based on our social identities, based on, your ethnic identity, your racial identity, your gender, your culture, all of those things, it informs how we think about ourselves, how we interact with others, and how to understand what is expected of us based on those identities that we hold, and what are the outcomes if we deviate from those expectations. So I'm just really quickly going to take you around this wheel, the cycle of socialization, that will help us understand ourselves. Of course, when we're born, we don't have any notions of who we are or who others are. We have no prejudices or biases or any information about ourselves at all. But our first socializations, and you can think about this, how important it is to have those notions of who we are in place. Look at how important gender reveal parties have become, right? So folks to have all of the symbols in place, the language in place, all of those things before the baby's even born, right? And before it even knows who it is. So all of those kind of cues from society about what it means to be a girl, what it means to be a boy, are surrounding the infant from the get-go with all good intentions from the family and friends and the people that love it the most. So those are shaping those expectations in the first socialization, shaping those expectations of the norms and the rules and the models of ways to be in the world. And then as we come around the cycle of socialization, we begin to understand and are reinforced about those notions through those institutions, schools, church, peers. Media is a big one, entertainment. And those are reinforced throughout our lives through those kind of awards and punishments, the privileges that come with certain identities, the discrimination that we view, the stigmatization of deviating from what those norms might be that are in place. And those result in a lot of different internalized emotions. So that could be internalized depression, it could be internalized fear, guilt, shame, violence, any of those kinds of emotional reactions, and also those kind of instinctual reflexes when we encounter people that maybe we don't know that well, we don't have a lot of context for, those emotions can come back up. But luckily with the cycle of socialization, when you come back around, there's kind of a decision point, right? So like a board game, you can either go this way or you can go that way. And the one direction is, well, we don't do anything. I don't want to make waves. Status quo works in my favor. I'm going to just keep on chucking around the cycle of socialization. Or we can do what we're doing today, which is educate ourselves, think about it, pause, take time to learn more, question those societal norms, question, why are we doing it that way? Why are institutions providing this information? And interrupt and raise our consciousness. So that the decision-making tree that we're in right now. So I applaud you all for being here and thinking about this. It's part of that, breaking that cycle. So again, these are internalized. They come out in our interpersonal interactions, our structural systems, and they are baked into society. So now that we've thought about that, that's a lot to take in. That's a lot of information about how we got here. Why are these biases inside of us? Let's think about and have a discussion. What are some ways that you've noticed either negative or positive bias in communicating? And this could be, the first thing that I just came to my mind was that John Quinones show, What Would You Do? Have you guys ever seen the What Would You Do show? They give you a situation and it's like, you see those biases come out in folks or those great reactions. A lot of times it can be really empowering. But tell me, what are some negative or positive biases that you have seen, experienced in communicating?
Melissa, this is Meredith. I don't know if you can hear me. Can you? I'm kind of like on an iPad outside my surgery center for my husband. But so yeah, I think for me, I'm just kind of weird in my own way, but I've seen it positive and negative as far as communicating. As far as on the positive side, credibility. I think a lot of times people will associate credibility of somebody having a positive bias. So if someone sees that you have certain credentials or something like that, I've noticed myself that people say, oh, she knows what she's talking about just because, it's Meredith or she has a PhD or this or that. And so there's sometimes positive biases associated with that. On the flip side, I've experienced totally the opposite where, I often don't let people know my credentials, and I'm just Meredith and I'm very laid back, and people a lot of times don't realize what I am and who I am and what And so I have had people challenge me and actually say to me that I don't know what I'm talking about, or I probably just didn't know how to teach that right, because they didn't realize, yes, she has a PhD with 20 years of experience, and people have, thought that she just doesn't know what she's doing. And they've come out and said that to me. I'm like, ha, and just kind of came back and said, yeah, you don't know who you're talking to. But it's kind of interesting that there is negative bias when people, will not associate someone with having credible information or the proper credentials, or not think they are experienced enough, or not the right person to be giving the communications or the information. And I think people, I've seen it too, that that person shouldn't have the knowledge to be able to share that information, and they'll discredit their communications because of that. And it's sad that that happens.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, it's funny, especially in academia, how much we rely on those credentials to inform how we speak to people, or how people respond to the ideas that we have as well. So I bet others can relate to that experience as well. Are there other examples? Carrie, I felt like you were coming off mute. Did you have something that you wanted to share about bias in communicating?
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting, like a very nuanced situation. My oldest child is non-binary, and they're born as female, and then present very feminine in a lot of ways, but they have some very masculine feelings and very masculine. They have periods where they dress very masculine, but because they are very slight and just shaped more like a female, then people don't acknowledge that they're non-binary, or they actually refute that they're non-binary. And so it's uncomfortable sometimes if I don't really know who I'm talking to, how they're going to respond, because everybody seems to have an opinion about it, and they think that it's okay if I say, actually my child goes by they, them, or he, and they see somebody who appears very feminine and is a teenager, and they say, oh, they obviously don't know what they're thinking. They're too young to know what they feel like. And then say, no, I've had years of discussions with my child. They feel masculine. So even if they look to you like a somebody who is feminine, I expect you to say they or he. And it's interesting that people think that just because I've shared that information with them, that I'm requesting their opinion on the matter, or that that they can just ignore the request of my child.
Yes,
but it's a very uncomfortable area in our culture right now. So
thank you so much for sharing that. That is kind of a form of unconscious bias that's turning into a microaggression, right? So it's really discounting that lived experience of you and your child and what you know to be true. So I hate that is happening, and people feel like they might know better. How insulting that must feel. Right. And then, along those same lines, there might be people who, as you said, could refuse to use the correct pronouns, or or if they change their name, they might not feel comfortable with that. And of course, that is, again, their own biases coming out as well. So
I have actually, my child's changed their name a couple of times as they've and evolved through their
Mhm.
understanding of their own gender.
Mhm.
And so I have friends who are actually like, well, I can't keep track of the names that your child's gone through. And so
Mm.
at this point, I'm just gonna ask you each time
Mm.
or something, something, or they'll just say, I'll just pick one of the names, I'm not gonna get it right. And they think that it's okay to say, oh, you know what, you've requested this. I'm actually telling you I'm not going to get it right. Because what they're saying there, like when they say I'm not going to get it right, they're saying I'm not going to try to get it right.
Mhm. Exactly.
Because their grandfather was in the hospital dying of Alzheimer's and he was able to get it right.
Mm.
And that kind of showed to our family, it's like, you know what? If a crotchety old man from a Southern Baptist family can get it right when he has a significant mental deficiency, I think that a middle of the road young person, young adult should be able to get it. So
Yeah, I agree. That again is that, another form of is microaggressions as well. I'm not even going to try. So that is a very harmful way of communicating. And we can see other examples of these kind of positive and negative biases in communicating. We've got an example to show you here to see how does this come up in the media, right? This isn't direct people communicating with us, but this is, those messages that we're internalizing. And here's a side by side. These are both from the Times-Picayune. They ran, the same week, possibly the same day. These images after Hurricane Katrina, and you can see, I'll just let you look at these and read the captions, how words can really impact the way that we're processing these very similar images. So you can see they've chosen the language looting on the left, and then finding, like, sounds so resourceful, right? On the right. And I don't know. We can assume, did they do that intentionally? I don't know, but the harm is still the same, right? So the messaging that's coming through is may not have been intentional. Maybe it was their unconscious bias, but still, when people are reading this and they're not seeing it side by side, you're taking in that message that, okay, I see looting and I see finding and being resourceful. Let's look at another image. Again, this is a side by side. These did not run side by side. This was the same news source, the same date, the same author put these two similar stories up. What do you see here that is different in these two media photos? Yeah, go ahead, Janine.
One isn't, they're in suits, and the others they have on like t-shirts and aren't, like pulled together so much.
Yeah, so they've got the mug shots, and they had to go and probably find these buttoned up photos of the men on the left, and of course indicating kind of like they're wrestlers, they're athletes, gives them a little bit more context. And this is just four, it doesn't even say four people, fathers. It's really kind of dehumanizing the images that we are seeing. And what the explanation for both of these, again, they ran the same day, same similar instance. But when we see these messages, we might not recognize them until we put them side by side, right? So we need to all be more conscious of those messages that we're taking in. I had another really quick one that I wanted to show you, and this just came up for me. Well, this is another one. So this was in a child's tracing book, and you can see the images here. Trace and draw the child's face. Happy for the white child, sad for the Black child, proud, and angry. And these are images that are in a first grade book. So we're internalizing, we're not realizing this, but these images and messages are internalized. Here's another one from the Red Cross. Be cool, follow the rules at the pool. And I'll just let you take this in, but we'll see. Here's the girl, she's being cool. Here's a boy, he's not being cool. And as you go around, I don't know what the deal is with this guy, but we can see, that the images of not cool are often the brown-skinned children. And this was from the Red Cross. This is incredible. And the only two really cool people are the white people in the pool. So again, just to kind of bring up a couple of other ways that even in children's cartoons and languages, these images are coming up at very, very young ages. So we want to be cognizant of these, especially when you're in communication and thinking about the most vulnerable groups. Of course, these are all the underrepresented groups. The groups that have the least amount of power are the groups that are most vulnerable to unconscious bias. So of course, women, non-majority racial and ethnic groups, working class and poor economic status, LGBT community, immigrant status, body size, disability, age, religious affiliation, appearance base, and unfortunately, there are others that we aren't listing here. So being cognizant that the impact of these particular groups and these messaging can be very detrimental for those internalized emotions and feelings. We have relied a lot in these biases that we have internalized on stereotyped information about groups that we don't really know that well, and that's not helpful. However, when we are trying to build relationships across our cultural and social identities, we do need to have a starting point to realize that we have different experiences, and those would be considered generalizations, a starting point. So what's the difference? And I just want to quickly run through a stereotype, which is what we want to avoid, that leads to bias. These are really based on selective or limited information about groups. Stereotypes contain judgment. My way is better, that way is wrong. These stereotypes think in terms of all or always, all people of this belief or whatever that may be. Disregards information that contradicts its validity. People say, oh, that's just one person, that may not be like that. On the other hand, generalizations, which is a good place to begin, are based in research and data. So we have lots of information about different cultural and social identities to begin with. They're non-judgmental. Generalizations, again, are used as a starting point some or sometimes as a place to begin a relationship or start a conversation. And then, of course, change when presented with new information because culture and society is changing all the time. So those are a little bit of some things to keep in mind as we're moving forward. I do have some resources I would recommend. Blind Spot, if you haven't read that book, and Inclusive Conversations as well are a couple of great resources. And I'm going to hand it over to Stephanie. I think I've talked way too much.
Hey, everyone. That was really good conversation, and I appreciate the vulnerability and transparency of each of you. It makes for a much richer learning experience, and it lifts off the content into the everyday lived experience, which is what is important. We can learn all of these tools and information, but if we don't apply it or use that critical eye to our practice, then, we've just spent some time together. So thank you, Janine. Janine was like, Stephanie, you ready to talk? Let me move the screen, but I will graciously ask that you reshare it again so we can move into this next segment. Or Melissa, I'm sorry. Thank you. Okay, next slide. So our second opportunity was to really explore the return on investment of inclusive behaviors. A lot of times we talk about belongingness, and I am really excited that the world of higher education is focusing on belongingness, but we can't get belongingness without having inclusive behaviors. That allows for a person to feel a sense of belongingness. So we're going to unpack that a little bit and then specifically start looking at it through the lens of communication. Next slide. So one of the things that we are working on and encouraging folks is to really think about inclusive job descriptions. If you want to have an inclusive environment, and we say things like, we want diverse perspectives, we want diverse identities, we want everyone to be able to bring their full selves to work. And we got to think about, what do we do to bring people to the environment? We know some research that Melissa and I use when anyone in our unit is doing new employee orientation is a citation from the Harvard Business Review, which says diverse teams bring about the most innovative products. And so we know when we're in a work environment and we have lots of diverse thoughts and minds and identities, we're going to have that representation of think and do, which is extraordinary for NC State. So we might think about exploring alternative years of experience and really hone in on what the position requires. And I'll give you an example right now. I'll use this example throughout this slide. We are hiring for the director of multicultural student affairs. And one of the requirements says that you need to have 3 years of supervision of professional staff. Now, what we're running into, you all know, because of the Great Resignation anyway, a lot of folks have left higher education. So our pool is smaller. We have some really good people in the pool that would be great, but they don't have that 3 years experience of professional staff. Now, some of them have supervised graduate students who may have worked full time before returning to school. So the way that they show up as an employee may be different from someone that goes straight from undergrad into graduate and hasn't really had a professional job, earning benefits and such. And so we are really, what is it that we need? Do we need to have someone that is able to supervise someone and has a lens of that? And we also know, working in higher ed, you can be a wonderful supervisor, but if you get a subpar employee, it's going to take a long time to necessarily move that person on to something where their gifts and talents could be used better. How about that? It's going to take about 18 months to 2 years of you coaching a performance improvement plan. So if that's the skill set we need, how do we know that the threshold of that is equivalent to 3 years of supervision? So we may have people that hold diverse identities, but when they see that 3 years, because they haven't been given opportunities, they may have not been hired because there have been search committees that have acted through the lens of bias to keep them out, then they are cut off from even being considered because they're not meeting a qualification that may not necessarily be related to the tenets of the job. We need to think about eliminating gender bias, using gender neutral words like understand, launch, work collaboratively, develop. I will move down. Melissa, will you click on the link that says use a gender decoder? Thank you. So this allows you to paste your job description in this white box that's there, and then it will go through it and tell you which terminologies may land more through a bias lens to male identified folks or female identified folks. Because you know what happens if you are a female identified person and it uses language like lead, direct, manage, technical skills. Because of our socialization, sometimes as a female identified person, we may say, I don't think I have the skill set for that. Or there are 10 job characteristics. And as a female identified person, we only meet 8 of them. So we're not going to apply for the job. Whereas conditioning and socialization for male identified folks, they meet 3. Oh yeah, I can do this job. So even thinking about the language is important in terms of how we want to have an inclusive environment. Okay, we can go back to the deck, Melissa. Thank you for that. Think about showing support for persons with disabilities. We use often must be able to lift 50 pounds, as opposed to minimally must lift 25 pounds without assistance, may lift over 25 pounds with or without assistance. So just being really clear, saying things like a person must be able to move through the space rather than walk through the space. So being conscious of how our language can be setting ourselves up to not be inclusive. And again, removing unnecessary educational requirements. I think it was Meredith earlier that talked about how even when people know aspects about your identity in terms of education, they operate like, I believe that you know all the things. Are all the things necessary for the job or the project or the engagement, and really hone in on what's important and what's not. And a lot of folks are using DEI statements, and people want to know, if I'm coming to engage in your company or with work or partnership with you, do you have a pronounced statement that demonstrates your commitment to the advancement of DEI? And some folks, if you all are seeing them, I've seen it a lot in corporate. I don't know that we're vulnerable enough in academia to admit this, but corporate America will say things like, we understand that our organization is imbalanced right now. We have more individuals that identify in this capacity. We're looking to alter that. We want this. And then they really go into a spiel as to why diversity and equity and inclusion is important or critical for them. Next slide. And I invite you, that was just, this gives you an example of it. My apologies. I said click it when you didn't have to. So I actually put the director of the MSA job description in and looking at the coding of our words. So this is what it looks like. We said lead 3 times, leadership 5 times, persistence, determined, competence, competency, and leading, support, responsive, supportive, inclusive, responsible. You see the difference that comes up there and how that may yield that candidate pool. Now that I've done this, and I was just probably doing this yesterday, I need to go back to our candidate pool, and I'm actually going to count and see, based on how people identify themselves through the utility of perhaps pronouns or other indicators, and kind of see where we fall. Okay, next slide. So thinking about some of those strategies, we'll go a little bit deeper. So language to avoid, you all can see them. Some people still say minority. That's not necessarily an acceptable term. People will prefer that you actually use the identity that is associated with them. And sometimes this is difficult. In federally funded spaces, the term minority is still very much used, but it is not something that people that hold marginalized identities would gravitate toward if you're writing or speaking about them. Certainly not illegal alien, homosexual, transsexual, sexual preference as opposed to sexual orientation. And you see the other ones down there. Politically correct can send some kind of triggering in terms of who determines what is politically correct and what is not. So it may just be something to avoid altogether. Next slide. So we use a TED Talk in our microaggression section that says, before you adopt a new terminology, just Google it, see what it's for. When my kids were younger, and I was trying to be the cool mom and relate to them, and they just got so embarrassed for me using it. Most of the time I was using it right, but they just didn't want me to use it at all because, it was their vernacular and I had no business with it. But before we adopt something, when we hear it, Google it, get some understanding of it. Look at it a couple different places before you add it and begin to use it in your communication. Use people first language and don't say a disabled person versus a person with limited sight, a person with a disability. Try to focus on them and not the additional identity that sometimes can be set in a marginalized place. Avoid ableist language. Consider the use of pronouns. we have the ability to use them within our university environment. And as one of our colleagues was speaking earlier about the terminology of it, it honors individuals. If someone tells you what their pronouns are, their preferred pronouns, please honor them in using them. Please model it and use it yourself so that people that even identify within that community can be honored and valued, but we can all be affirmed, because sometimes the way that we present and how we self-identify may not align based on that socialization that Melissa spoke of. Be understanding and empathetic about concerns related to inclusion and climate, and avoid tone policing and telling people that, you know, that's not a big deal, or you're too sensitive about this, or, you know, like what you all were saying earlier, well, that's just too much, you know, it keeps changing, I'm just going to do X. That is policing someone through action, and it's not necessarily okay. Next slide. So consider the sensitivity of words and their impact. Hearing, I'm basically not going to honor you, even though you've told me that, is being truly insensitive. And be attentive to how you select photos and the subjects within them. There's a unit on, and well, it might be this unit now that I'm thinking about it. I was getting ready to maybe CALS, but there was a beautiful photo of one child on it. And she's a little Black girl, big smile. And I think I saw it maybe 2 years ago. The young woman is well into college. So that was what the person we had. We haven't had a happy little Black girl since that time. Clearly, we gotta do our work. Is it possible to name and give voice to the persons in the photo? Like, even when we put the photo there, can we give honor to who they are and identification, that they are not just a stock experience? And we really need to stop using the stock photos as much as we can. We have many stock photos that are associated with NC State as opposed to random ones that we Google. And think about, are we tokenizing any group in particular? What does it look like? I thought that was a great example, Melissa, that you showed by the pool. That would be tokenism, you know, it also in a negative way in terms of who was demonstrating bad behavior. Does everyone in the communication look the same when you're attempting to expand the narrative? So if you're saying we want to reach out and have inclusion, do we have the same folk all the time? Do we have the same folks participating in things all the time as well? That's a different situation. And are power dynamics coming through? Do you have photos where there is someone that holds one particular identity, like out in front, and other people are in back? Like, visual messaging is real. And on your websites, who is represented? Who are we seeing? If diversity is not a reality, how do you address it? How are you making those bold statements that allow folks to see we are engaged in the work? We're not completely there, but we're leaned in, rolled up our sleeves, and we're action facing forward. And is all content accessible? I had an opportunity recently to work on a presentation, and I was running into all kinds of kinks of just making sure that my presentation was accessible for those that might need that. And it takes a lot of time for me until I get the easy row of doing it. But it's important for me to do that because I want the message to be accessible, and for anyone that engages to be able to do it in the way that honors them and doesn't create a barrier for them. Next slide, please. So this is a slide, and we can share this with you in terms of intentionally monitoring your behaviors. There are 8 stages of thinking about oppression, moving from actively participating all the way over to initiating and preventing. So I won't go deep within that, but we'll share this slide so that you can reflect about your actions and challenge yourself to be more anti-oppressive in action, in communication, and in all the spaces and fears that you influence. Next slide. And we want to also always strive for equity, and we are counting all of you as inclusive leaders. And to do that, we need to think about how inequity is operationalized and how it goes. And Leah P. Hollis has some wonderful work that we use. And inequity happens about who is asked. Are the same people asked all the time? Who volunteers? Who feels comfortable enough to say, yeah, I'll do that, because they know they got support to be able to do it? Who says yes? Who negotiates? Some people don't feel like they have the power to even negotiate a project or something that's happened. Who's given resources to do the work? What is noticed and what's given credit? All of those things can have tenets whereby equity is not happening. On the other side, if we use equity to inform our data and make decisions based upon that, we can really get to the heart of things. We can explore the impact of decisions by the disaggregation of data. So not just looking at overall women, but looking at women that are Black, women that identify as Latina, women that are international, seeing if the narrative that we present at the top still holds true when we disaggregate. We can look at policies and procedures that we're creating through an equitable lens, and not doing it after the fact of once we develop what we want, then we go back and say, oh, does this make sense? Is it advancing DEI? We want to have that lens as we are creating things to make sure that someone is not advantaged over someone else. And we want to have an intentional involvement of those who are not asked. We know who they are. They may not volunteer sitting around the table or on the big Zoom, but it may be useful for us to go back to those folks and say, hey, this is happening. This is going on. How about you sit on this committee, or maybe you chair it, and give them that affirmation in an inclusive way that they may not feel on a broader scale, and determine barriers to more equitable outcomes so that you can ensure that across the board, everyone is getting what they need, despite any kind of original frameworks that were not designed for them to be successful or advanced. Next slide. That's it in 1 minute. If you have an insight or a highlight or reflection, please drop it in the chat. Janine, we thank you for this time. I know we were quick running through it, but if there is an opportunity that you would want us to come back and either spend a little bit more time on something, we're happy to do that. I think we have one more slide after that. Yeah, just as a reminder to what Melissa was saying in the beginning, if you want to come play with us a little bit more, we have our IE certificate, and we spend a lot more time on bias and, of course, applied cultural identity, microaggressions, and fundamentals of equal opportunity. But again, if you have a comment, feel free to drop it in the chat, or if you want to come off of mute, you can do that as well.
While we wait for any thoughts to come through, thank you both so much. So with this Inclusive Excellence Certificate, do people sign up through Reporter, or do they reach out to you all directly? How do they learn more?
You named it. We are in Reporter. There it is. She's quick. She's quick. Absolutely, Bethany. We appreciate that. So we will go have more time and a little more meat, but anytime. And you know, one thing that we've been really fortunate with, all the sadness that has come as a result of COVID, we've been able to reach folks like never before, and really doing many more virtual options. So we're here and happy to provide any kind of assistance and share some space so that we can continue to all do this really good, powerful work together.
In 2023, I would love to offer a workshop where people like actually workshop some of the things that you all talked about, because it's, you know, I think hearing it is one thing, but then like trying to test yourself and practice those things, because it does take practice, if you know, thinking about everyone, not just from your own purview. And so I think having a time where people could, you know, again, like creating the safe place that you all have, try to practice some of what you all have spoken about, that would be really helpful.
We can absolutely do that. And we are always looking for ways to apply it. So it aligns very well with our practice and how we are really encouraging people to take the next leap. So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks everybody for coming. We haven't released our 2023 CALS Comm Workshop schedule yet, but it should be coming in the next few weeks. Stephanie and Melissa, if you all would share your slides with me, I will share them with the group. They were wonderful. And especially those slides at the end, I'm interested to see what some of those small words were.
I totally get it. Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
you.
This is so important. I really appreciate it.
Right. See y'all soon.
Take care.